2017 became a year of horrific discovery in peaceful Great Britain. A routine police call turned into the uncovering of one of the country's most terrible criminals. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they found two men, one of whom needed immediate hospitalization. The property owner was in critical condition, his face was covered in bruises and cuts, and doctors suspected a concussion and internal bleeding. At first, the situation seemed straightforward. The injured man appeared to be an assault victim, and he fully supported this version of events. Medical staff doubted his survival, but when he regained consciousness and could communicate with the police, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Once officers checked his phone, the terrible truth was revealed. Before them was not a victim, but one of the most brutal criminals British soil had ever known. Before I dive into this chilling story, make sure to subscribe to my channel. I cover major true crime cases and explore the psychology of criminals. The story of this person begins in the city of Jambi, Indonesia, where Reynhard Sinaga was born on February 19, 1983. He grew up in a luxurious mansion with three younger siblings, surrounded by numerous servants. His father, an influential businessman, owned significant real estate, managed one of the country's largest banks, and had his own palm oil plantations. Young Reynhard lived in a world where his every wish was instantly fulfilled. The Sinaga family practiced conservative Catholicism, regularly attending church. Reynhard grew up as a quiet, introverted child, passionate about music and books. He avoided noisy groups, preferring solitude and studying. At private school, the boy demonstrated brilliant academic results but often became the target of mockery due to his feminine behavior and love for the pop group Spice Girls. School teachers later recalled that Reynhard had a special talent for languages. He was fluent in Indonesian, English, and Chinese. Despite classmates teasing, he found solace in studying and often helped other students with homework. His father, aspiring to raise a worthy heir, insisted on additional classes in economics and management, but Reynhard preferred humanities. 2001 became a turning point in Reynhard's life. He enrolled in the prestigious University of Indonesia in the Faculty of Architecture. Unexpectedly for everyone, the shy young man transformed into the life of the party, finding common ground with everyone. His striking appearance and sociability made him popular among his coursemates. After graduating in 2006, Sinaga decided to continue his education in the USA. However, American student life disappointed him with its excessive freedom. Despite prepaid tuition, he left college after a few weeks. Money meant nothing to him, thanks to his father's wealth. Moving to Manchester in 2007 became a new chapter in his life. Here, Sinaga earned 2 master's degrees, in urban planning in 2009 and sociology in 2011. It was in Britain where he finally felt free to be himself, openly acknowledging his sexual orientation, which he had hidden in conservative Indonesia. Reynhard's first years in Manchester were a period of active adaptation. He rented a small room in student housing, where he met a group of international students. His natural charisma and ability to listen quickly made him popular in the student community. He often organized parties for his course mates, where he demonstrated his culinary skills by preparing traditional Indonesian dishes. In Manchester, Reynhard enjoyed a carefree life, fully financed by his parents. He settled in the gay village area, where he led an active social life. To avoid visa problems after completing his studies, in 2012 he enrolled in a PhD program at the University of Leeds, choosing a dissertation topic related to the LGBT community of South Asian origin in Manchester. However, over time, Reynhard's personality underwent noticeable changes. He became extremely self-centered, constantly showing off on social media and fabricating stories about working at Manchester United. His relationships were characterized by excessive possessive behavior and manipulation, including threats of self-harm during breakups. Reynhard's acquaintances noticed his particular obsession with social media. He could spend hours editing photos for Instagram, creating an illusion of a luxurious life. His pages often featured photos from expensive restaurants and clubs, although he rarely visited them. He paid special attention to creating an image of a successful international student enjoying all the advantages of life in Great Britain. His connection with family became purely pragmatic, he only mentioned his parents when he needed money. During rare visits home, he would each time display a new appearance and behavior, which disturbed his family. His parents, especially his mother, insisted on his return to Indonesia, marriage, and joining the family business, even threatening to stop funding his studies in Great Britain. Despite his mother's threats to cut off funding, Reynhard managed to convince his parents of the necessity to continue his studies in Manchester. However, the constant need to hide his true identity from his family began to affect his psychological state. At the end of 2014, after another visit to Indonesia, 31-year-old Reynhard returned to Manchester. By that time, he had spent over a decade as a student, leading an active social life that seemed no different from that of other young people. There were no warning signs, no alarming signals or indications that criminal intentions were developing in his mind. The first documented incident occurred in late 2015, when a 22-year-old man was celebrating New Year's in Manchester. Moving between clubs, he ordered a drink at a bar. This was the last moment he remembered. The next morning, he came to his senses on the floor of an unknown apartment, not understanding how he got there. The apartment's owner, Sinaga, told a convincing story about how he offered help to an intoxicated stranger who could barely stand. The victim, feeling general weakness and illness, attributed his condition to excessive alcohol consumption. He even thanked Reynhard for his help, considering him a good Samaritan. After this incident, Sinaga boasted about his act in messages to friends, disguising the crime as a casual romantic encounter. His acquaintances, unaware of the true nature of the event, perceived it as an ordinary New Year's Eve story. At that time, Reynhard lived with a roommate who noticed his strange behavior. He often brought home intoxicated strangers who disappeared in the morning and never returned. When the roommate began to show concern, Sinaga forced him to move out, gaining complete control over the apartment. Sinaga's crimes had a distinct pattern. From his apartment window, located in the epicenter of Manchester's nightlife, he observed visitors to numerous bars and clubs. He paid special attention to young men who either separated from their groups or showed signs of intoxication. After choosing a potential victim, he would approach them with feigned concern, offering help, a chance to charge their phone, warm up while waiting for a taxi, or just rest. His friendly appearance and persuasive manner of communication lulled victims' vigilance, who agreed to go up to his apartment. The deliberately neglected appearance of the apartment, scattered items, clothes, and alcohol bottles, created the impression of ordinary student housing, making guests feel at ease. Sinaga would offer them drinks, adding substances that rendered people unconscious and unable to resist. A particularly dangerous substance figured in this criminal case, a colorless liquid without a characteristic odor, which was practically impossible to detect in drinks due to its barely noticeable salty taste. Although this substance has legitimate medical use in treating narcolepsy, it poses a serious threat due to its properties. After taking the drug, within 10 minutes a person experiences strong relaxation, drowsiness, and loss of self-control. Most dangerously, after waking up, the victim usually doesn't remember the events that occurred under the influence of the substance. An additional complexity in investigating such crimes is that the drug is eliminated from the body extremely quickly, leaving no traces. United Kingdom legislation severely punishes possession of this substance. Even a small amount can lead to actual imprisonment. However, Reynhard Sinaga managed to obtain a significant supply of the drug, which he systematically used against his victims. The criminal operated according to a well-established scheme. First, he conducted a kind of testing, asking victims various personal questions while observing the deterioration of their cognitive abilities. The questions seemed like ordinary small talk, but in reality helped the criminal determine when the drug began to take full effect. An important component of his criminal activity was collecting trophies. Sinaga took personal belongings from the victims, from documents and bank cards to clothing items. He stored all these items in a special box under his bed, creating a sort of archive of his crimes. The process was documented with particular thoroughness. The criminal used two cameras, one set up on a dresser for a wide shot, the other held in his hands for detailed filming. Some recordings lasted up to 8 hours, during which the victims remained unconscious. Police later established that Sinaga stored over 100 hours of video recordings of his crimes. He also kept a detailed diary where he described each victim, including personal data and his impressions. In the records, he cynically called himself a hunter and boasted about his trophy collection. The body's reaction to the drug varied from case to case. Some fell into a deep sleep, others experienced nausea and felt unwell. There were cases when victims briefly regained consciousness and tried to resist, but their movements were uncoordinated due to the drug's effects. The next day, victims found themselves in a difficult psychological situation. Some felt shame and discomfort, quickly leaving the criminal's apartment. Others intuitively understood that something bad had happened but couldn't reconstruct the events in their memory. There were also those who woke up completely immobilized from the drug's residual effects. Reynhard's long-term impunity was aided by the fact that victims couldn't remember details of the crime. Their memories ended at the moment of consuming alcohol, and the criminal would convincingly tell the same story each time about how they had simply had too much to drink. The investigation revealed that he carefully studied his victims' social media after the attacks. He added them as friends from fake accounts and monitored their lives, enjoying the fact that they didn't remember the crime. In some cases, he even commented on their posts, alluding to the events of that night. Sinaga's appearance played a key role in his criminal activity. Despite being over 30, he looked much younger and created the impression of an ordinary student. His short stature, slim build, and impeccable manners didn't raise suspicions among potential victims. Investigators later discovered that Sinaga carefully studied psychology and behavior of people under the influence of alcohol. They found numerous bookmarks on medical articles about the effects of various substances on the human body and consciousness on his computer. He even took online psychology courses to better understand how to manipulate people in vulnerable states. The turning point in the case happened by chance. At 4 a.m. one day, his apartment was visited by 21-year-old Michael, who had lost his friends at a party and was looking to charge his phone. The unusual behavior of the host, a sober man wandering near a takeaway at such an hour, raised suspicion. When Michael refused drinks, Reynhard became confused and started acting strangely, which prompted the guest to leave the apartment even with his phone not fully charged. Michael didn't even realize that his intuition had saved him from the most dangerous criminal in British history. The investigation showed that Sinaga was particularly active during student festivals and sporting events in the city. He deliberately rented an apartment near the popular nightclub Factory, where most of his victims came from. According to police, he could commit up to 3 attacks per night. Sinaga's criminal activity continued from 2015 to 2017. During the day, he led an ordinary life as a PhD student, working on his doctoral dissertation. In 2016, his academic work was criticized for being overly autobiographical, forcing him to completely rewrite it. However, for Reynhard, this became just another reason to delay returning to Indonesia. He was active on social media, created content for TikTok, communicated with friends in group chats where he boasted about his achievements, cynically referring to his crimes as saving young men from their girlfriends. By 2017, his self-confidence had reached its peak, leading to some carelessness in his actions. The situation became increasingly risky, victims began waking up during the crimes, but Sinaga, having lost caution, continued his actions. He kept an enormous amount of digital evidence on external drives and his phone, and also tracked victims' lives on social media. In 2017, the first police report occurred. One of the victims became aware of the attack but couldn't remember either the address or details of the crime due to the effects of the drugs. Despite investigators obtaining DNA samples, the database search yielded no results since Sinaga had never previously come to law enforcement's attention. The decisive moment in the case came on June 1, 2017. 18-year-old Peter, a school rugby team player, was celebrating the end of final exams at a nightclub near Sinaga's residence. Around midnight, feeling dizzy from alcohol and loud music, the young man went outside for fresh air and sat down to rest in an alley. Reynhard, noticing the young man from his window, quickly appeared nearby. A friendly conversation about studies and life ensued. After 10 minutes, Sinaga, pretending to be cold, suggested continuing their chat in his nearby apartment. Peter agreed, planning to meet up with his friends later. In the apartment, after the young man returned from the bathroom, the host offered him a drink. After drinking the clear liquid that resembled vodka, Peter almost immediately felt severe dizziness and nausea. When he tried to message his friends and mother, Reynhard took his phone and suggested he lie down. Trying to reach the front door, the young man lost consciousness. Sinaga, as usual, prepared cameras for filming and turned on bright lighting. However, after 4 hours, something unexpected happened. Peter regained consciousness and realized what was happening. Thanks to an adrenaline rush, he was able to push away the attacker, who ran out of the room in panic. When the young man began gathering his things, Reynhard returned, trying to create the impression that a criminal had broken into his apartment. He attacked Peter, head-butting him in the stomach. Realizing the seriousness of the threat, the young man began defending himself. A violent fight broke out, during which Sinaga bit and scratched, but Peter's athletic training allowed him to overpower the attacker. Trying to escape, Peter faced another attack near the front door. Reynhard, realizing that the exposure of all his crimes depended on whether the victim could leave the apartment, clung to the young man with desperate force. Using his physical advantage, Peter delivered a series of blows that led to the attacker losing consciousness. Finding himself in the building's corridor, Peter initially wanted to call his mother but realized the seriousness of the situation and possible consequences of his actions. Due to a dead phone battery, he began knocking on neighbors' doors to call emergency services. The ambulance crew, arriving at the scene, found a bloodied Peter in the corridor. He immediately informed the medics about the attack, forced administration of an unknown substance, and the necessity of self-defense. When the emergency medical team arrived at the scene, they found unconscious Reynhard lying in a pool of his own blood. His condition caused serious concern among the medics. The police officers who arrived shortly after, assessing the situation at the scene, immediately detained Peter, mistakenly identifying him as the attacker. Their conclusions were based on the stark contrast between the physical conditions of both men. One was of slight build, the other a well-built rugby athlete. Without conducting proper investigation and medical examination, the police relied solely on visual assessment of the situation. They couldn't imagine that the sturdy Peter could have been the victim in this situation. The young man was placed in a cell, where he spent the next 11 hours in complete uncertainty about his future fate and Reynhard's condition. Meanwhile, Sinaga's condition in the hospital caused serious concern among medical staff. Doctors diagnosed a possible concussion and suspected internal bleeding. When Reynhard regained consciousness, he told the nurse a dramatic story about becoming a victim of assault and rape in his own apartment. The medical staff was sympathetic to the patient, especially given the numerous injuries on his body. During the police visit to the hospital, Reynhard immediately requested his mobile phone back, allegedly to contact his family. In reality, he was planning to delete incriminating video recordings. However, following standard procedure, investigators seized the phone for examination. Initially, this seemed like a mere formality, given Peter's accusations. Police suspicions arose when Sinaga deliberately began providing incorrect passwords to unlock the phone. The situation escalated when he tried to forcibly take the device from the officer. After gaining access to the phone's contents, detectives discovered shocking evidence, a video recording of Reynhard raping unconscious Peter. This radically changed the course of the investigation. Peter was immediately released, and Sinaga was arrested. It later emerged that in his haste, Peter had mistakenly taken Reynhard's phone instead of his own. This led to even more shocking discoveries. the device contained numerous pieces of evidence of Sinaga's other crimes. During the search of his apartment, police found hard drives containing over 800 video recordings of attacks carried out over 2.5 years, thousands of photographs, a collection of victims' personal belongings, and evidence of stalking victims on social media. Photo evidence helped identify 195 victims, although the actual number of victims could have been much higher. Sinaga refused to cooperate with the investigation and maintained silence until the trial began. The most challenging aspect of the investigation was informing victims about the crimes committed against them. Many victims didn't even suspect they had become victims of violence. Some categorically refused to acknowledge the fact of assault, unable to accept the horrible reality. Many victims couldn't bring themselves to view the photographic evidence of the crimes. The revelation of the truth had a devastating impact on victims' lives. Psychological trauma led many to lose their jobs or drop out of education, seek solace in alcohol and drugs, suffer from depression, and in some cases even attempt suicide. The trial, which began in June 2018, became unprecedented in British judicial practice. The hearings lasted 2 years and were divided into several stages. Only 48 victims agreed to testify against Sinaga, while others categorically refused to participate in the trial. The jury had to review all available video recordings of the crimes to confirm the unconscious state of victims during the attacks. This was necessary because Sinaga's defense insisted on the consensual nature of the sexual contacts. In January 2020, the court found Reynhard Sinaga guilty on 1,509 counts, including 136 incidents of violent acts against 48 victims. He was sentenced to 88 life terms with the possibility of applying for parole after 30 years imprisonment, a punishment typically reserved for serial killers. In December 2020, the Court of Appeal reviewed the sentence, increasing the minimum imprisonment term to 40 years after the Attorney General's office deemed the previous sentence too lenient. The Sinaga case led to significant changes in British legislation regarding sexual crimes. Control over the circulation of drugs that could be used to sedate victims was strengthened, and support programs for male victims of violence were expanded. Manchester Police created a special unit for investigating similar crimes. Reynhard's mother, who came from Indonesia, couldn't believe her son's guilt. For her, it was impossible to accept that her gentle son could commit such brutal crimes against so many men. She held out hope for a judicial error until the end. This criminal case, which became the largest investigation of its kind in British judicial history, continues to resonate in society and remains open due to the possibility of discovering new victims. In 2021, Manchester Police announced the discovery of 60 more potential victims of Sinaga. Thanks to new digital evidence analysis technologies, investigators managed to identify additional video recordings on backup storage devices. However, many of these victims refused to testify, seeking to forget the traumatic experience. Reynhard Sinaga himself continues to serve his sentence in HMP Wakefield Maximum Security Prison, known as Monster Mansion, due to the large number of dangerous criminals among its inmates. According to prison administration, he spends most of his time alone, avoiding communication with other inmates. His only contact with the outside world remains regular visits from his mother, who still hasn't lost hope in his innocence. In 2022, BBC released a documentary, Catching a Predator, which details the investigation of Sinaga's case. The film caused significant resonance and led to the creation of new support programs for male victims of sexual violence. In particular, a specialized crisis center for men opened in Manchester. In 2023, it became known that Sinaga began writing memoirs in prison. This caused outrage among the public and victims' families. After numerous protests, the prison administration banned him from publishing any materials about his crimes. The Sinaga case continues to influence British legislation. In 2024, Parliament passed a new law strengthening punishment for using psychotropic substances to commit crimes. The law unofficially became known as the Sinaga Law and provides for life imprisonment for such crimes even without aggravating circumstances. Families of some victims united in a civic organization that fights for improving security systems in nightclubs and bars. Thanks to their efforts, Manchester introduced mandatory testing of drinks for dangerous substances in all nighttime establishments in the city. In 2025, the Indonesian government began negotiations with Great Britain regarding the possible return of Reynhard Sinaga to Indonesia to serve his sentence. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments what you think about this case. If you enjoy deep dives into true crime, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, friends.